Hey, what's up, everybody? It's your boy Tony Robles. Another episode of Triple P, the People's Poet Podcast. Today we have two wonderful guests. Before we get to that, however, please hit the subscribe button, smash that button. Also, hit the little bell so that we can send you updates. Also, please leave comments. We'd love to hear from you. Perhaps you might have some suggestions for future shows. So be sure to leave a comment. Our guests today have been guests in podcasts within the last few weeks. Grace Talusan, a wonderful author of a beautiful memoir called The Body Papers. And for those of you who have not read this book, please, that is a must read. And also Betty Ann Quirino. She is an author and she is also a journalist. She has a cooking blog called AsianInAmericaMag.com. So welcome once again to Triple P. How are you today?
Good. Thank you for having us, Tony. And it's an honor to be in the same podcast with Grace Talusan, an author I admire. And I have her book, The Body Papers, both in print and on Kindle. And I've read her other short stories, and I'm in awe of her. So this is a big honor for me.
Well, thank you. And it's wonderful to be here with you both and have this time to talk with each other. Both of you are also wonderful writers. And Betty, I know that you've been, you have your recipes and the food and the cookbook and other things that you share, which I think is so important too. Am I frozen?
No, not at all. But
Okay.
but if you are, it would be as sweet as halo halo. So let's not discount any freeze.
Right.
Sometimes
Okay.
I know that happens on Zoom, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it's good to have you
Totally.
both. We're all in the same time zone. And one thing, in interviewing you both, I just felt like we didn't have enough time. That there were some things that we could have talked more about. Um, I was thinking about this notion of language, and both of you are are wordsmiths, both of you are writers, and we deal in language. We're dealing in your case, Betty Ann, the language of food, and then in your
Yes.
case, Grace, the language of memory. And we know that we are kind of like exiles from from the past, right? We bring our past with us, and with that, we do pay a certain price to be where we are in life. And I noticed in both of your stories, what really touched me deeply was the relationships that both of you had with with your parents. So, Grace, if I could start with you, can your book is a memoir. Can you talk about the importance of memory in terms of your life as a writer and your evolution as as a person?
Thank you. Well, I think that hearing stories about um, people in my family was really important to me because I didn't grow up around them. I didn't grow up around my extended family. I didn't grow up in the Philippines. And it was really important for me to hear stories because otherwise we just didn't exist. Like I needed to know some of these stories about my family because they were stories that made me feel proud, like that, my family had done things and, um, you know, just to even hear, like there, I guess so much of my experience felt almost like a ghost or being invisible because there's just no representation or something. It was almost like the Philippines didn't exist unless it existed when they showed up the Philippines showed up in the news, which usually was for a terrible reason, like a really bad reason. So it was important for me to hear stories, which are other people's memories about the Philippines or other Filipinos. Um, and those became my memories, like it was, and those are the sorts of stories that I explore and that stay with me. They're not some of the things I directly experienced, but some of the things I write about are the stories that I heard that I was not there for. And so those are really important. It's a way of like asserting that I exist or something to hear that those stories. Um, Even though, the Philippines was a colony, we were a part of US history, and yet I had one line in a history book about the Philippines. So
And we honor that
I,
because we are in Filipino American History Month, which we're primarily concerned with the relationship of the U.S. in the Philippines, colonization, and everything that happened. I mean, I was talking to Oscar Peñaranda, the historian, the other day. October 16th, 1587, Filipinos landed in Morro Bay. Um, Now we know that culture is a part of memory, right? It's how we make sense uh, of the world. Um, you know, Betty Ann, can you talk a little bit about that? Because memory is so much ingrained in what you do. I mean, as in food, and how that relates to love, and how that makes us more human. Can you talk about that?
Yes, thank you. And I love what Grace said. For me, memory is my coping mechanism. Um, Especially now, this year has been challenging for all of us, and I don't know of anyone who has not been kept awake at night worrying about what's going to happen tomorrow, next week, 3 weeks from now. So memory has always been my coping mechanism, and there's always been there. We always have challenges, even before pandemic. Like moving to the United States 30 years ago for us was a big challenge, and you don't realize that till you're here, and there are things you need and want and long for that are not there. But it's the memory that keeps me going. I try to remember what what would my mother have done, what did my mother do, what did my parents do in situations like this. And I hope someday my children will have the same memories, memories we created here in the United States as a family. I hope that the aromas in the kitchen of adobo and sinigang and just garlic simmering stovetop will bring back memories for them and help them the same way it did me.
I was thinking the aroma, the taste, the touch, and finally the love that goes in making all of those come together, um, is a memoir in itself. In a way, it's a memoir. Now, you read Grace's book. Both of your experiences are different, yet there are some similarities. I know that you've been here, Betty Ann, for 30 years or so. Grace, came over, since she was a toddler, and her book, the launching pad for the book is she goes on a trip to the Philippines, making yogurt and all these things that are crossing the street, and all these things that happen. When you read Grace's book, and how did her book hit you as being somebody who immigrated here a little bit later, even though your experiences were a little bit similar? How did the book hit you?
Well, I was her book is very relatable in the sense that at the beginning, the setting immediately caught me. First of all, I started reading her memoir like late at night one day, and the yogurt making in the first chapter made me
Right.
very, very hungry. And I'm thinking, I should not be reading food memoirs. And I'm thinking, this is this a food memoir? So I kept reading, and then she was relating, how it was in BCG, how she almost got run over and everything, and it brought back memories of the Philippines and the noise and the traffic and the dust and the dirt and the heat. It was very relatable, so it kept me turning the page, Tony, and I wanted to know what will happen, to her in the next few days,
Did you
and on and
see
on.
did you see any connection with your experience with hers? I mean, was there anything in the book that said, "Hey, you know what? I really feel that. I understand it. I may have experienced that myself.
The change, in country and setting, uh, it was like role reversal. There was a big change for us when we moved here. And then whenever we go back for balikbayan trips, like pre-pandemic, almost every year, there's always that jarring change in weather, in temperature, in the culture, and like Grace in the book, there's a lot of things that she had to keep reminding herself that she was a Filipino American on Filipino soil,
Yeah.
and I could relate to that.
Uh, now, Betty Ann, you said that your two coping mechanisms were cooking and writing. Grace, talk about your coping mechanisms because I know you've been through, been through here and back. You've been through so much. Anybody that reads your memoir can really dive into it and feel it. Tell us about your coping mechanisms and how you've been able to kind of overcome what you've been able to deal with.
Thank you. Well, I think I mean, there's a lot of different ones, but part of the work for me was to know that coping mechanisms existed, like just the fact that there were healthier ones or ones that were not as healthy, and that we could have a choice to find ways to better take care of ourselves, as opposed to just saying like, okay, this is how I am and I can't change it. Just to know that like there was possibility for change is huge. So I did a lot of like self-help reading, um, those sorts of books, meditation reading, like podcasts, but also individual psychotherapy, as well as like support groups and all kinds of ways of intentionally gathering with people to do things that were in our best interest and do things that were healthier. It wasn't necessarily like therapeutic stuff, but it was like people that said like, it's going to be really good for us to take a walk. Let's go meet up, and take a walk, or let's do these things that are healthy for us. So I think I'm drawn to people who want to do things that, to treat ourselves well and find ways to cope given our trauma histories and other things that we've been through. So I learn a lot from other people. Frankly, is how I learned some of those coping mechanisms.
Well, I know food is very powerful in in terms of memory and culture and how we connect with who we are. Not only that, but also connecting with other people in other communities. My uncle Al Robles was he was an activist. He was really about connecting community. Betty Ann, how do you find that food kind of plays in terms of bridging people and creating community? Have you found that food really works that way?
Oh, very much, Tony. In fact, we live in northern New Jersey, which is not the Filipino enclave that people think of when you say New Jersey. We're northern part, closer to Pennsylvania. So this is a white suburban area. Um, and when we over the years we've been here in this neighborhood for forever, when there are potluck parties, barbecue, summer barbecues, we're always asked what to bring. So I don't pretend to be an expert in Italian cooking or American or French, but I can do it, but I'm not an expert. So I bring what I know what to do best. What I do best is lumpia Shanghai and our Filipino barbecue. And I tell you, and imagine a backyard barbecue of an all white neighborhood. We don't know anyone except the host who invited us. And I bring a big platter of lumpia Shanghai and the Filipino barbecue, which all I did myself in my backyard. And do you know that every time I bring it, in less than 10 minutes, it's gone. Even before the host can put the main dishes on the table, and everyone wants to know what is this. It's delicious. You know, everyone just forgets to ask, is it gluten free? Is it keto? Is it vegan? Nobody asks that. They just all grab the lumpia Shanghai and the Filipino barbecue. And I've made friends with that.
Well, for those of you that are that may not be familiar with lumpia, I know probably most everybody is. If you go to the website Asian in America Cooking Mag.org, Betty Ann gives a demonstration on how to prepare lumpia, so that if you make a big tray of lumpia, then everybody can come and rate it. It'll be gone in like 2 minutes. Um, One of the things uh, that 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 really moved me in both of your stories, in talking to you, was the relationship that you have with your parents, particularly the relationships that you had with your father. Um, I saw, some similarities there with both of your fathers. Just personally, what I read into it. Um, Grace, your father was an optometrist. Betty Ann, your father was he had a heart of a farmer, right? That was in his blood. Um, can you? Well, I tell you what, Grace. Why don't we start with you? He was an
Mhm.
optometrist. He moved to the States. He worked in a prison at first, and then I guess he went on to have his own practice. Can you talk about the transition, and and maybe the price he's paid for his life here in the U.S.?
Uh, so he always made this distinction about an ophthalmologist as opposed to an optometrist.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yes, but so it's interesting. Um, I think he's glad that. I mean, I know he's glad that he had his career here and that we settled here. There was one point when we went to the Philippines and he visited his former mentors and the people that he worked for. And one thing I went with him to visit, and one thing that he noticed was just like the level of access to equipment and stuff. Like my father could buy on his own as a single as a person just in practice by himself. He had access to all this equipment and machinery and all this other stuff that um, was I think out of the reach of people that he worked for and stuff when he went to the Philippines. So I think he liked being able to use things that had like the latest technology and stuff like that. So he saw it as a plus for sure to be here. But in terms of what you lose when you always have to give something up when you immigrate. I mean, you give up your country. Um, and there's a lot of things. I mean, he gave up his language, he gave up the food that he liked, he gave I and his family. And I know this because of how they would react when they encountered someone who was Filipino. I know, Tony, you grew up in a place where there's a Filipino community. And Betty Ann, you're probably in the same situation that I'm in, where we didn't encounter many Filipinos. So if we happened to see one on the street, we would stop and talk to them. And my father would always ask, are you Filipino? He has this habit even now. I mean, not now in this moment, but like I remember he told me a couple of years ago he was at a mall in New Hampshire, and he was speaking. Someone was like sweeping the floor, and he was waiting for my mother, and he drew that person into conversation. And he said, "Oh, are you Filipino?" And the person was so startled, and they said, "Yes, I am." And I think they were an overseas for Filipino worker. So I think they were here just very recently. I don't know that they were an immigrant. And the person said something that really stays with me. The person said, "Oh, I thought I was dead. I thought I was a ghost because no one ever sees me or speaks to me. You're the first person who's spoken to me and, who's seen me
Wow,
in a long time."
wow,
But I
wow.
think my father felt the same. There's a way that he was not, none of us were really seen, very clearly. Um, so yeah, so we would always stop, and he did it when we were in San Francisco. Even he did it when we were in Hawaii, and the people were like, "Yeah, we're Filipino. Like, why are you asking us? There's like so many Filipinos all around us here." So
Well, I tell you what's funny. I was working in a supermarket down here, and I saw a guy come in, and I said, "Hey, are you?" Usually say the Filipino. I mean, I just assumed that he was. He says, "No, I'm Micronesian," and little did I know that there's a Micronesian community down here. I said, "Man, you look dead on Filipino." I couldn't tell. I said, as a matter of fact, I told him, I said, "Let's make a deal. How about being Micropino?" He said, "I'll think about it." So, Betty Ann, let me ask you, your father, he remained in the Philippines, is that correct? And
Yeah, my father died the year we moved to the States.
mhm.
So
Oh,
that's
okay.
sad.
So, Grace's father, there were some sacrifices that he made to come here and establish a life. And then, you know, as Oscar Peñaranda says in our conversation, that with everything, particularly if you're immigrating, that there's a price you pay. You never really get away clean. Their choices aren't always clear cut. There are pros and cons to both sides. Tell me, in your relationship with your dad, what it was most of all about him that stayed with you when you came here, and what has helped you the most that came specifically from him.
Oh, Tony, thing is, my father died the year we moved. Um, he, the thing is, when I finally told him that plans were all set and we were leaving for the States because of my husband's job opportunity, he was not happy, like any parent. And by then I was an adult with two small children, and being a mother, it hit me how painful it must have been. And I remember talking to him. He was seated on the couch on his favorite spot, reading the newspaper. And in fact, I wrote about this on my blog. The sun was streaming on his face, and I said, "Dad, we're leaving." I said, "We're leaving." And I gave him the date. It was supposed to be several months from that conversation. He put down the newspaper. He folded it. He did not say anything. And for the first time since my mother died, I saw him crying. There were tears down his eyes and the sun reflected on his face. Um, oh God. And no words, no conversation, just that. We look at each other. And he said, "I don't want you to go. You're going to have," it wasn't a selfish, "I don't want you to go." He explained it to me. He said, "You're going to have a very hard time." He couldn't explain it, but that's all he said. "You're going to have a very hard time." And I said, "But Dad, we're all set. Plans are in motion, and we have our papers and everything." Then he said, "Okay, do this." He said, "Promise me one thing. Bring a Belen with you." A Belen is the nativity set that most Filipinos have in their homes during Christmas. And he said, "Bring things with you that will remind the children, my children, of their culture and what they could count on when things get rough," he said. And he didn't say much anymore after that, Tony. It was so painful for me to see him crying. And I think it was even more painful for him. What did I bring with me on that trip? His strength, his wisdom, things he taught me through the years. What do you do? That's the cycle of life. And he just didn't want me to move to the United States because he said I will have a very hard time. And through the years, he was right. But what did I do? I pulled out my coping mechanisms from my pocket. I remembered the lessons my parents told me: to be strong, to be courageous, to have faith, to be hopeful. And there was always food. At the end of the day, dinner had to be ready, and that was how I dealt with things. I cooked food, I put it on the table, fed the children, fed my husband, and repeat the next day.
Well, that kind of reminds me of what you had said in the last interview, that your mother had the caldetas, you had the big pots, and that your father always wanted a big breakfast, and
Mm.
that there was no skimping. I mean, it was serious, three meal 3 meals a day in that kitchen. You had a clean kitchen and a dirty kitchen, right?
Yeah, and an outside kitchen where we had the barbecue grill set up and the wood kindled wood set up for ihawan and long simmering. Yeah, that was life for us. When I was growing up, day by day, every day. Dry season, wet season. As you know, in the Philippines, we only have two seasons. Summer vacations were spent. I didn't have the summers my children here in America had, of summer camps and swim camps and doing stuff. No, summers were spent pickling mangoes, making mango jam, harvesting mangoes, harvesting produce, baking ensaimadas or pandesal, even in the heat. So that was our life. That was our leisure. We
And that's Tarlac. Is that correct, Tarlac? You were
Tarlac
from
was
Tarlac.
yeah, Tarlac was where I grew up,
And then
north of
you were
Manila.
born in Manila, though, right? Manila.
Yeah, I was born in Manila, but Tarlac was where my parents were. My father was from. The Besa family. We were from Tarlac.
Now,
Did our
Grace.
families know each other?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, Tony, did you know
Oh,
that?
sorry.
What's that?
What
I
Grace?
didn't know. I mean, I assumed like my family is also from Tarlac, so I assumed maybe our families knew each other.
I think if we trace, well, sadly my in-laws aren't around anymore. Um, there are no more senior citizens in our family who are around. But if I trace that, I'm sure they knew each other. Down the line, grandparents maybe.
Yeah.
Well, if there's any family watching from back home, how you doing?
Yeah.
Hello. good, to, good, to,
Right. Yeah.
good to see you guys. You know, Grace, I wanted to ask you. You have Betty Ann and yourself. You got two different experiences, but there are similarities. Now, did you grow up, speaking Tagalog, or did you grow up like just speaking English? And you know what? Zoom says that I have 10 more minutes. For some reason, I'm not sure why they did that. But could you just maybe talk about that? Did you grow up like bilingual or?
I didn't. I came up of age in this generation where a lot of the Filipino immigrants didn't teach their kids Tagalog. I
Mhm.
think they maybe people talk to each other. I don't know, but I did not. So I don't, unfortunately. But I could. I used to say like I could understand a little bit because I learned to hear like when my parents would say my name and then like speak Tagalog. I sort of like learned to hear it. But I don't think so. I don't like I have a feeling about Tagalog, but I actually can't comprehend the words or anything.
Yeah, before I went for the first time, I took a couple of Tagalog classes, and I really kind of worked hard. And I'm not fluent, but if I hear some words that I understand, I can kind of figure out um, what's going on in the conversation, right? But sometimes what happens with Philams who don't have that language, we feel like we've lost out on something. We feel ashamed, you know, and we feel like that's a part of us that we don't have, and there's a lot of shame um, that comes with that. But what I can say is that going to the Philippines and actually walking and feeling that earth beneath me, that all kind of went away. That shame just kind of slipped away, and I feel like when I speak with you, Betty Ann, and really the love and the warmth that you give, it just makes me feel that much more uh, solid in who I am. You're like an auntie. I mean, I just feel the closeness to you. So anyway, we have about maybe 8 more minutes to go. Yeah, I thought we had a full hour, but what can I do? Can you leave us with some last, not only last, but lasting words? So, why don't we start with you, Betty Ann?
Are you talking to me, Tony?
Oh,
I'm sorry.
yes, yes, yes.
Okay. Well, anyway, I wanted to say in the same breath as Grace, in our household, the languages in our household were Tagalog, Kapampangan, English, and Spanish because of my mother's lineage. But Kapampangan, in Kapampangan, we mean when we say let's eat, it's mangan, mangan, mangan. So as a
Oh, yeah.
parting gift, I have a virtual bibingka for
Oh my
Merienda
gosh.
for the 3 of
Wonderful.
us.
I'm gonna take
And
some of
I
that.
have,
Right.
you have your beverages, your hot tea and coffee, and there's some coconut, um, grated coconut, and I'm going to sprinkle it as I
Oh, that
give
looks
you
good.
parting words. Sprinkle, sprinkle, sprinkle everything you do in life with love.
Right on.
And as we say
Great.
in
Yay.
Thank
Kapampangan,
you.
mangan,
Thank
mangan,
you.
mangan, mangan.
Thank you.
That's it.
That's,
And Grace?
that's beautiful. Um, I think it's really important to ask people about their lives and to hear people's stories. I mean, I'm a writer, so of course I think it's important to write them down. But whether you write them down or repeat them or not, I think the mere act of asking somebody about their life and being curious, the way you're curious, Tony, like you have really great questions. You pay attention so closely. Like I think that's the act. Like that's the important thing there. So I just think it's a really wonderful way to connect and to other humans is to like be
Oh, for
interested in them
sure.
and curious.
Hey, Betty Ann, not only do I want to eat your words, I want to eat the babinka too. We do have we have 5 minutes and 40 seconds left. I wanted to get your opinion on something. I spoke with Oscar Peñaranda a few weeks ago about Filipino American History Month. And, this term, and I hope I'm saying it right, utang na loob. And what he said that means literally is a debt, like a debt that you feel like you owe inside, right? And that how the how that term and how that concept, right, that notion in our deep structure has been kind of corrupted, where people in power institutions have used that as a guilt thing to make us feel guilty, to feel like we're obligated. Whereas what he said was that um, you know it I utang la loob means that I as a human being owe you goodness. Okay, I owe you that because you too are a human being. So I feel like you two as writers, as a memoir writer, food writer, and somebody that gives those gives love through food. You kind of, I guess, you kind of live that. That's kind of what you guys do. Can
Thank
you
you.
talk? Can you talk about that a little, just a little bit? Is that something that you've thought about on a conscious level, or is that just something that's intrinsic? Like, hey, that's in my blood.
I mean, I feel I've been taught this way. I mean, but not in an explicit way. I don't think my parents never did it as a lesson. It's just from watching them. And it's very simple, even the food thing. Like you always, if you're going to go to someone's house, you bring something, right? And if you pick it up somewhere, that's okay, but it means something else if you do like what Betty did
Yeah.
and made this beautiful bibinka. Like that means like that's on a different level of bringing something and bringing something of yourself. So I definitely have an appreciation for that. And I do have this notion of trying to pay things forward and give to my nieces and nephews the way my uncles and aunts and grandparents and elders gave to me.
I'll tell you something funny. Growing up, we had the same thing in my house. My father used to say, if if you're going to go to somebody's house, make sure to knock on the door with your elbows, which I thought was, which I thought was cool, but it really means something very deep. Betty Ann Quirino, AsianInAmericaMag.com.
Thank you.
Your 3 books, Instant Filipino Recipes, number 1, number 2. My Mother's Philippine Recipes. And number 3, Isa Dalawa Tatlo, right? I hope I'm saying that right. Number 3, How to Cook Filipino Recipes or Philippine Recipes, Cakes and Snacks.
Yes.
The wonderful, wonderful book, The Body Papers by Grace Talusan. You know, sometimes I just feel a little bit jealous that I didn't come up with this title. The Body Papers. I mean, that's a badass title. A memoir by Grace Talusan. Let's see, we have some blurbs in the back. Let me just read one. Alex Marzano Lesnovich says that Grace Talusan's The Body Papers is one of the fiercest and most intimate books I have ever read. It is a memoir of immigration, of multiculturalism, of family betrayals and loving binds, and deeply a memoir of the body, about the documents and silences that regulate it, and the memories and emotions that live inside it. Talusan has written an urgent and necessary testament of our time. And again, the winner of the Restless Book Prize. It is published by Restless Books, Grace?
Restless Books.
Okay, so again, we're going to have to wrap up because Zoom is giving me the white flag or the SOS. I tell you what, Betty Ann, since we're not there, and we do have 1 minute and 22 left, can you take a little bit of it and just maybe just put a little in your mouth and then...
We can enjoy it through you, Betty Ann.
Oh, yeah, there we go.
Mm.
Fantastic. That is great.
Someday we will meet and I will share food. Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. So we have less than 1 minute to go. To both of you, thank you so much. We're going to have this on YouTube. Again,
thank you.
If you're watching this, hit the subscribe button. Leave a comment on how tasty that babinka was. Even if you weren't able to eat it, if it's in your imagination, it's there.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much.
Beautiful.
And till next time, take care.
Take care.
Thank
Be safe,
you.
Tony and Grace.